So welcome everybody. Welcome to our Kaleidoscope lecture. Very happy to see so many people joining us this evening in Toronto time. Welcome to the Color Research Society of Canada. I would just like to begin with our land acknowledgement. The Color Research Society's activities related to sharing color knowledge takes place across Canada, understood as part of Turtle Island, the ancestral homelands of over 630 First Nation communities, representing more than 50 Indigenous nations and languages. We work to respect, affirm, and support, where necessary, the inherent treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples across these lands and waters. Our commitment to honoring the knowledge, ways of knowing, and wisdom of Turtle Island's Indigenous peoples aims to contribute to the decolonizing work required today for moving towards a just society. So I would like to welcome everybody. I'm Robin Kingsborough. I'm the president of the CRSC, and I just have a couple of announcements to share with you. I would like to encourage you, if you're not a member, to join us. We have our Kaleidoscope series where we have monthly talks through the fall, winter, and spring sessions. And we've just, we're trying to work on our membership benefits. We've started having members nights this year. So we're really working hard to foster a Canadian community of color enthusiasts. So if you haven't joined, please consider joining. The membership costs are modest, and you help support the Canadian color community. Part of what we do is student award. So we have our student award deadline coming soon, March 1st. Please check our website and we can put that in the chat too. If you are a student at a Canadian institution or know a student, please let them know. And the deadline again is March 1st. We, as the winners of our student awards, get to give talks to as part of our lecture series, and they get their information shared on our website, and they also get a small cash prize, which is always helpful for students. So one thing that we very much like to do is to support the Canadian student community for color research. I'm very excited to welcome our speaker for this evening. And I met John at the Color Impact Conference last June in Rochester, and heard very enthusiastic things about a talk he gave. So he's going to share some of his insights today about the power of red. John Seymour is an applied mathematician and color scientist. He teaches color science at Clemson University and consults as John the Math Guy. He holds 31 patents, has written 71 publications and presentations, and he writes a blog described as Applied Math and Color Science with a liberal sprinkling of goofy humor. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing some of that goofy humor. And John, take it away.
Thank you, Robin. It is definitely a pleasure to be speaking to all these people from Canada. I will try to speak in Canadian, and I'll see if I can go about that well, but I will probably lapse back into my American accent. One thing I want to answer right off the top is, why am I doing this talk on color psychology? It's a crazy topic for me to take up because I'm an engineer, a mathematician. But I'll give you some background on that to help you to see where I'm coming from. I teach a class. I started teaching a class several years ago at Clemson University. There is a university involved. It's more than just a football team. I started teaching a class in the graphic arts there. And my students were kind of interested in psychology. Every time they wanted to do some kind of a class project, it always had to do with color psychology. So I said, okay, I'll throw in a few classes about that, a couple of lectures here and there. And I began to realize that you find a lot of stuff, a lot of information about color psychology on the internet. If you Google color psychology, you get 1.3 gazillion hits. And most of them are garbage. Most of them are saying things like yellow is a happy color and green symbolizes this, and gray is a dark color that reminds us that Seinfeld isn't on the no episodes aren't being created anymore. All this stuff that is some of it may be true, but most of it is completely without any sort of backing. There's nothing to say why this might be true. There's no experiments behind it. So I thought, my students want to catch some of this color psychology. A lot of them are going to wind up being graphic designers or something like that, where they are going to be involved with color and applied color psychology. In other words, marketing, trying to sell something, trying to convey information with the subtle use of color. So this is important stuff for them to be learning. So why red? Red is, I'll give you an anecdote to start off with. This guy is, let's say his name is Rex. I don't know what his name is, but let's pretend his name is Rex. He's middle-aged, which means that he thinks he's going to live to about 110. He's driving his new car. He just bought this new car, a convertible, obviously. And somebody unmute yourself and tell me what color you think his car is.
Red.
Yeah. That's kind of obvious, I think. That is a cliche. That is the stereotypical car. You can tell it goes fast because it's red. Now, my car, on the other hand, I have a 2005 Honda Civic. It will go from 0 to 60 in about 2.47 days. It's not red, it's gray. So we have this expectation, we have this psychological something underplaying this that says that red would be the color that you buy if you're a middle-aged guy and if you want to start pretending that you're not middle-aged anymore. Let me talk more about red, though. Why? Let's give some actual science that says that red is an important color. First off, in 1969, two researchers, Berlin and Kay, enlisted the help of a lot of different missionaries all across the world. They sent them charts with all kinds of colors on them, and they had the missionaries ask the natives what colors they saw. What name do you put on those colors? And they had some interesting findings. One of them in particular is about the growth of language through time. On the far left-hand side, we see kind of a cryptic part of this chart, WRY, that's white, red, yellow, and BK for black, green, blue. All of those colors in the nascent languages, you would typically have just two color names. You would have white and black. And everything that was a brighter color, you would call white. Everything that is a darker color, you would call black. Gradually through time, another color gets added, and they found that the third color that's added was always red. Red has some sort of a primal importance to us, that when languages are being fabricated, when they're being developed, somebody says, hey, let's make red a special color. So based on that, I'm going to say red has some sort of an important meaning to us. Now I'll bring in some more scientific evidence, something more recent. This is from Domicelli Giannaskaita, and I think I have actually pronounced her name right. I did meet her once. Fascinating person. She had recruited 4,600 volunteers in 30 different countries. This was an internet type of experiment. And they were to match 20 different emotion terms, happy, sad, things like that, with 12 different color names. In other words, she's asking, how do you associate? What color do you associate with this emotion? This is the chart that she would use. You would see, if you were taking this experiment, you would see red up in the top, and then it'd say, what do you associate that with? And there's all these little circles for you to click on to say, you'll notice that in the lower right-hand corner, love is filled in. This person had selected that as a big connection to them. They also associate red with anger, somewhat less. But basically, all of the subjects of this experiment were given the opportunity to go through all of the colors and mark off those colors that had some sort of an emotional connection with them. And here's the results, simplified. We see on the left-hand column here, interest, amusement, pride, joy, pleasure, etc. And on the bottom, we see red, orange, yellow, green, the 12 colors that were in her experiment. And we see the color in each one of those boxes. It's a fire code, I guess you would call that. The dark red means the strongest association. In other words, the most people agreed that, in this case, red and love are that's the strongest connection. So based on this multicultural experiment, I think we can say that red is primal when it comes to something to do with our psychological feelings about colors. The strongest connection is between red and love. Now, here I have another very, very scientific experiment. I did a blog on this a while ago. I looked at 6 different psychology pundits, people who claim to be experts at color and psychology, and I looked at what they had to say. What did they have to say about red? What adjectives did they use? I found a very common theme was that red revs you up. These are the different phrases that were in these 6 different, there's 3 blogs and 3 books that I went through. Passion or passionate, speeds up of the metabolism, exciting, energy, aggressive, enthusiasm. Those are all terms that are like, yes, rev things up. And then I did this. And I did the same thing looking at the opposite, mellows you out. This is a list of all of the phrases that were in those 6 sources, all of the phrases that say red calms you down somehow. So we see that there is a consensus among these 6 self-proclaimed experts. There is a consensus that red is an exciting color. So here's my evidence for saying that red is worth considering in this view of things. Color of the middle-age crisis, sports car, obvious. Red is the 3rd color adopted in nascent languages. It's the strongest linguistic connection that we found, and color pundits agree that red has this psychological effect on people, physiological effect. So I'm going to make the claim that if there is anything to this whole color psychology business, if there's anything to it at all, it's got to show up in red, and it's got to show up in diamonds in red. So the first claim, red means love. That was the strongest connection that Jonas Skytte found. Why do we associate red with love? Well, flowers, and not just flowers, but roses. I hope that many people will be receiving roses tomorrow. And Valentine's Day cards that you remember from 3rd grade. Oh, I hated that. But they're all red. So clearly, that's why we associate red with love, because of Valentine's Day, or I don't know. That sounds chicken and eggish to me. Is it? Does Valentine's Day mean that red became the color of love, or is it the other way around, that Valentine's Day became red because red is the color of love? I don't know. I can't answer that. Now, before I get into more deep psychology here, I want to talk about 3 related hypotheses about color and psychology. The first is that people associate specific colors with specific emotions. That's what Jonas experiment was about. You name a color and they name the associated feelings that go along with it. That's kind of level one. Level two, colors evoke specific physiological responses, like red revs you up. It has a physiological response that causes adrenaline and blood pressure and all this kind of stuff. That's a second level of hypothesis that we could post thinking about color. The third one is that it evokes specific emotional responses. Red makes us hungry, for example. Does it? I don't know, but that's a third level of response here. And then the fourth of the three is that colors, specific colors, can stimulate a specific action. This is the marketing thing. If I make this product red, people will buy it because of the color. The color will enhance the ability for the product to jump off the shelf. So let's look at this question here. Does red make you sexy? Oh, baby. Well, there was an experiment that was done. This is not a, how would I put this? This is a good experiment, but this isn't a laboratory type of experiment. These folks, Kramer et al., looked at the color of the clothes in this British dating show. In the British dating show, they had people come in, they filmed them before the picking out the dates, and then on the date they film them. So there's footage of what these people were wearing when they initially showed up for the interviews, and also when they were on the date. And they looked at the question. They had quite a number of people. They had 500 people that were filmed that they had looked through the films of. I can't imagine looking through all of that. Male, female, and they were male-female comparisons and males who dated males and females who dated females. So this is all combinations here. They looked at those films and they found something very interesting, that on the date, people were more likely to wear red. This is taking into account the fact that some people will wear red more frequently, because they're looking at now the difference of how many people wore red before the date and how many people on the date wore red. But there was a preponderance. For some reason, people were wearing more red when they went on the date. And they also found out that people tended to wear black more often. Now, I should back up just a slide here. Hang on. This was reported in Psychology Today, which is an online place, reputable place. But I have a beef to pick with them. The title of their article was, "What Colors Should You Wear on a First Date?" And they described the experiment from Kramer and Mulgrew. The experiment itself was in a journal, but I got a beef to pick with them on this title. What colors should you wear on a first date? It's not about what you should wear. It's what people decided to wear. There was nothing in the original paper that tried to determine whether or not the dates were successful as a result of the red. So this isn't dating advice. This doesn't say if you wear red, you are more likely to get a second date. That's not the point of the experiment. It didn't have a way to test for that. It's simply, if you're going on a date, people tend to wear red more often. And there we come to one of the issues that I brought up, the different levels of hypothesis. What they were testing is what people do rather than what the result of them wearing red is. So the article on Psychology Today didn't really even answer the question that was posted in their title. So I'm making a claim here that it's easy to conflate these 3/4 different ideas. If we see some evidence, if we read an article about some experiment that took place, we need to read it carefully to find out whether or not we're talking about the colors were associated, whether or not there's a physiological response, whether there's a psychological response, and whether or not there's an action taken. Those are 4 different things, and it's very easy to confuse them. So, do red clothes make people sexy? That's a very reasonable question to ask because we don't know the answer to that yet. This woman decided to wear this lovely red velvet dress on a date. But we don't know whether or not that had an effect. Did that make the person she was dating think that she was more attractive? Well, this is an article here, Elliott and Niesta, that looked at 5 different experiments that were done on women wearing red. They would do things like have a photograph that was altered so that one photograph would have her wearing red and the other one would have her wearing a different color. And they would ask people to look at the picture and rate her attractiveness. And there were some somewhat significant results. Men were, when they saw a woman who was wearing red, they deemed them sexier and more attractive, which are 2 slightly different things. But it didn't have any effect on how they rated the person's likability. It didn't, if a woman wears red, it doesn't make her more likable necessarily, or kind or intelligent. And the other thing is that men don't notice that effect. In other words, if you would ask them afterward what color they were wearing, try to see if there's some cognitive stuff going on that makes them think, oh, that woman is wearing red, and make an association. So it seems to be something that's underneath. It's something that's happening subliminally rather than something that is actually brought into the conscious part of the mind to make that decision. And they also found that women weren't swayed. Women looking at women, and here I would guess just by probabilities that this is heterosexual women, weren't swayed by women wearing red. They wouldn't look at a woman and say she's sexier because she's wearing red. So this is an interesting result, and that's kind of goes along with what we would perhaps think, what we would believe if we were to read the internet. How about making men sexy? Obviously, this guy is very attractive to most women. Is he attractive because he is wearing red? Well, women do deem men sexier if they have red clothes on or if there's a red background in the picture. Men appear higher in status as well when they're wearing red. And it doesn't, just like with the earlier experiments, it doesn't affect whether or not women look at the man and say, oh, he's likable, agreeable, or an extrovert. And similarly as before, it doesn't affect men's assessment of other men. So this is a little pictorial that shows the different relationships. Basically in the corners here, the lower left-hand corner and the upper right-hand corner, we have the male to female viewing. And basically it says red makes somebody look more attractive. Or does it? Here's another paper. This is also written by Andrew Elliott. This is a follow-up to his earlier one. He investigated an isolated village in West Africa. So this is a village that is far away from the Western cultural experience. So they would not have been clued in on the ideas that we have as North Americans and Italians. They wouldn't know those basic concepts, those cultural concepts. They showed them pictures of women wearing red. They showed the men in the same basic experiment setup, and they found the same effect. Oh, okay, so this is interesting. It appears that this effect is something that's universal, that happens everywhere. It's not something that we learn in culture. Now, there was a bigger analysis that was done, Peppercorn et al. This is a few years later than the other ones. It's more bigger than the other experiments. There were 3 studies, a total of 830 men. So that is quite a large experiment to be dealing with that many people to collect data on all of them. Their result that failed to support this red effect. Oh, even more bigger analysis. This is Lehman and Elliott. Andrew Elliott again is involved in this paper. They took more data. They did a meta-analysis, which means that they took a number of different studies and they pooled all of the results from that. As a result, they had almost 3,000 men and almost 3,000 women. So this is an incredibly large database of information. And let's see what they found out. They found that for men, there is a small but statistically significant difference. In other words, if a woman were to wear red, there would be a very slight advantage to her. They would view her as more attractive, and it does hold up statistically, but it's small. And for women, they found it was not small, but tiny, very small difference, and it was not statistically significant. So the idea of red and love, does red make someone look attractive? We associate those 2 words. That's what Jonaskaita's experiment showed. But the psychological effect, not the effect of association, but the psychological effect is either big, small, or non-existent. It could be universal, though. Universally non-existent or universally existent. So that's a bit disappointing. I mean, if you read what's on the internet, it's like bang. It is a slam dunk. You wear red, you are going to be picked out of a line. Yes. So let's take another look at another emotion. We saw in Jonaskaita's experiment that anger was number 2 in terms of the association of over all colors. Anger and red were associated. Does it make you angry? Now, the upper picture, some of you will remember the Mythbusters episode where they tested this. Does a red cape make a bull angry? Well, those of you who understand color vision in animals will realize that most mammals are red-green colorblind. They have the green cone, they don't have the red cone. So no, what that bull sees when it looks at that red cape is black and not red. So, and that was bore out in the experiment. They tried different colors of capes and it didn't make a difference. The red did not incite anger. The bottom picture was from the movie, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the movie. This was a cute movie done by Disney, Pixar, where they showed the emotions living in a person's head, and the emotion in the head was red for anger. So it is popularly believed that red and anger are associated. Here we see Jonaskaita's experimental results. Well, let's take that back a little bit to the physiological level. Does it have an effect? There were some earlier experiments. Gerard, in the year that I was born, did this experiment where he showed people red, white, and blue, those colors individually, one at a time, and he measured their galvanic skin response, which means that he put electrodes on them and measured the voltage across the electrodes. Basically, that's a measure of the skin conductance. It's a measure of how much moisture is on the skin. It's a measure of whether or not you're sweating. So if you sweat, your galvanic skin response will change. And he found that red had a more significant effect, caused a change in the GSR. White was somewhat less effective, and blue was least effective. Excuse me. He repeated that experiment later on, looking at heart rate and the respiration rate, the rate that you're breathing in and out. His results were inconclusive. Well, following down this, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't know, there's about 10 different experiments there where people were looking at a physiological, something you can measure, EEG, electroencephalogram, skin conduction, melatonin. One of the experimenters pulled blood samples and looked for melatonin in the blood. And one of them had one of those things that you put on top of somebody's heads with all the electrodes, and they were looking for gamma band oscillations, which is some sort of an oscillation in the brain. And you'll see that the results, about half of the time, well, 4 out of 10, red was shown to be more effective at stimulating, that it does actually stimulate. So this would lend credence to this earlier experiments would lend credence to what you find on the internet, that red revs you up. But some of the more recent experiments, and in particular the last one, showed that that effect isn't there. Red, according to Stouch et al., is equivalent to green. Now they explained it like this: the strength of the human color gamma responses, in other words, the brain activity, for stimuli on the LM axis, that is the long and the medium cone axis, red versus green, could well be explained by the LM cone contrast. Let me explain that a little bit. When I show somebody, if I'm an experimenter, I show somebody red, what do I show them? Do I find a piece of red construction paper? Do I take a plaque and paint it with red paint? And if I do, what shade of red do I use? That's all important because according to their research, the explanation of this has to do with the strength, the richness of the particular colors that people were shown. And they make the claim that perhaps if it had all been equalized, if they had gone through very careful selection of the colors to make sure that they were the same richness of color, whatever that means, however they would measure that, that the results would not have shown up. That the reason why people were getting more excited is because the color was richer rather than the actual hue of the color. So far we have some mixed results. Does red make women look sexy to men? There's a small effect. Does red make men look sexy to women? There's a tiny effect. Red revs you up, or then again, maybe it doesn't rev you up. Here's another line of research that's kind of interesting. People looked at the idea of whether the uniform color, the color of a uniform of a sports team, has an effect on various parts of the game. Do they win? Do they get more fouls, less fouls, etc.? This was started back in 1988 by Frank and Gilovich, and they found that black was an effective color if you want to win. So the teams that wore black had a preponderance of winning more games. We see later on there is some significant response to red. Red seems to be an important color for uniforms. In particular, one was they showed a goalie, a hockey goalie. This is the Canadian part now. So it's a hockey goalie who's looking at films. He's watching somebody playing against them. They're taking a foul shot, so they're slapping the puck and heading for his face. They're different. The players in these videos have different color uniforms, and basically they found in this experiment that the people looking at the goalies who were looking at these films would tend to rate the people wearing red as more aggressive and more talented. So there does seem to be something to this. Then again, I had one of my students look at soccer matches from over a period of 20 or 30 years, European soccer matches, and looked at the colors that the kit is the uniform in soccer, the color of the kits for these, and he found that there wasn't any statistical significance to this idea. So again, I think this is something that is there. There is some reason for it to be there. We're not real sure about it, but there does seem to be some sort of an advantage, although it's not a huge advantage so far. red making women sexy, making men sexy, red revs you up, or maybe not. Red advantages probably give a small advantage. And in the Olympics, in fighting type of uh, sports, taekwondo, etc., things like that, they will flip a coin to decide who wears red and who wears blue in order to alleviate any possibility of there being an advantage. Now, one thought might be that maybe we can read the red in somebody's face. Maybe there is an evolutionary advantage for a social animal like a human being. Maybe there's a evolutionary advantage that would mean that if I can tell when somebody is blushing or when somebody's getting angry, it can lend to better harmony in the tribe. So that's the thought here. Detecting anger in a face might be an important thing that would get bred into us through evolution. Here's Andrew Elliott. We heard his name a couple times already. Dominance in aggressive encounters is signaled by the bright red oxygenated blood visible on highly vascularized bare skin. You gotta love somebody who can talk like that. That is wonderful. Vascularized means the skin that has blood vessels underneath it. Imagine you're sitting at a bar, somebody comes up to you and they poke you in the shoulder and you can see their face is red. You know that they are being the dominant one. That's what he's saying here. A testosterone surge, which happens largely in males, produces visible reddening on the face and hands, and fear, on the other hand, leads to pallor, a lighter color. So there is certainly an advantage to be able to read that from somebody else. Perceivers, people who are looking at other people, use that information about skin coloration to make inferences about the attractiveness, the health, and the dominance of conspecifics. A conspecific is somebody of the same species. I wonder if that's true. One question that I have about this is human beings evolved largely in Africa. A fair amount of that evolution occurred in Africa, where people had skin that is much darker than the skin that you see in front of you now, this Norwegian skin that is very, very pasty white. When I blush, it is immediately obvious. On the other hand, somebody who is from Africa, has ancestry going back there, it's not quite so likely that you're going to be able to tell when they blush. It's not as obvious. So I wonder if this is really a thing. Another question is, can we actually detect anger in a red face? Is that something that is a communication channel that we look at somebody, we see their face is red, and subliminally we say, oh, that person is angry. Here's an experiment that was done. Paroma, Olkanen, they created some artificial faces. You see all of these faces that have various range from a neutral face to scowling, angry face. And these were all created digitally. And then they varied also the color of those images so that some are redder, some are more orange, some are green. And they showed those to people, and they asked those subjects to tell them what they thought, do they see any emotion in the face? And here's what they had to say about that. Both facial redness and surround redness, the red around the face, enhanced perceived anger slightly, another small effect. The magnitude of the enhancement is generally small, so we question the practical significance of red in anger recognition. Perhaps it helps a little bit. Perhaps it can help you understand, oh, that person's angry, but perhaps the fact that they're swearing at you and yelling and poking their finger in your face, maybe that is a better way to tell whether or not somebody's angry. Here's another paper. Priming anger concept, priming anger concepts, in other words, making people think about anger, led individuals to be more likely to perceive the color red. So they were shown a scene where there was a small red object, and that object showed up better if people were trained to think about anger first. Evoking anger, in other words, if people were shown a film that had angry kind of things happening that would get somebody excited, that led to individuals to be more likely to perceive red as well. Interesting. So far, we've learned about sexiness in red, that maybe there's an effect. Red revs you up or maybe not. Red uniforms probably give a small advantage. We might be able to read anger in a red face. Red is more salient when we are angry or when we're thinking about anger. Now, here's another practical question. This is a applied psychology. Take a look at these road signs. You're driving home and you see the signs for all these fast food places. They're largely red. I did a study. I counted, I downloaded images from fast food logos, and I found that 68% of fast food logos have the color red in them. Some of them have other colors as well, like McDonald's and Burger King, but 68%, 2 out of every 3 logos for fast food places have red. Huh, maybe red makes you hungry. Wouldn't that be a good use of this using red here? Brand managers or fast food restaurants apparently think that this is the case, that red enhances the appetite. And I think if you do any Googling on this, you'll find that there's a strong consensus that red makes you hungry. And there's some places that say that red makes you hungry because of this other thing, that red revs you up, that it causes your blood pressure to go up, and that makes you hungry. I went looking for articles, for experiments that had been done to test this. Red is actually, according to this, Genschow, based on evidence that color elicits avoidance motivation. Oh, stop signs, for example, red lights, blinking red lights, these things tend to make us shy away, to back up a little bit. And the thought is that maybe red actually suppresses the appetite by doing this avoidance thing. We look at the red, we say, ooh, ooh. Subconsciously we back off, and that causes perhaps us to be less hungry. And in this experiment, they set the subjects down in a waiting room, waiting to go to what they thought was the actual experiment, where actually the experiment was done in the waiting room. There was some food sitting on the table, and they had plates or cups that were red or various other colors. And they found that participants drank less from a red labeled cup than from a blue labeled cup. They drank less. It did not make them drink more. Red did not make them. They ate less snack food from a red plate than a blue plate or a white plate. The results suggest that there is a color suppressance, a red appetite suppressance. Red functions as a subtle stop signal. So that's one experiment. Let's see if I can find any others. I spent a lot of time looking for these experiments. Independent groups of participants were presented with constant amounts of popcorns, chocolate chips, or moisturizing cream. They were given the cream to use on their hands. It wasn't left there for them to eat, just to make sure that that's understood. Red, white, or blue plates. They were asked to sample by tasting them. Results confirm that red plates reduce taste-related consumption. So now we have 2 papers that say that red does not enhance the appetite, red suppresses the appetite. 2 of them so far. Keep going. Here's the 3rd experiment. While bowl color didn't seem to have any influence on flavor intensity, People were given samples. They were asked to say how strong, how intense the flavor was. There were differences in other categories, like the desirability and the saltiness, but only for the picky eaters. Snacks in red bowls and blue bowls were perceived as saltier. Snacks in red bowls were perceived as less desirable. So there's a third paper that says, no, red does not enhance the appetite. Now here's yet another paper. This was done in the cafeteria of a hospital, and they were trying to encourage people to eat good stuff by putting labels on it and testing whether or not red and green and various other colors would cause people to enhance somebody's ability to pick something that's good for them. So in this cafeteria, they used red labels for unhealthy, yellow for less healthy, and green for healthy. And the phase 2 made the unhealthy stuff less accessible as well. Sales of red items decreased in both phases with a probability of 0.001, and green items increased in phase 1. So basically, this is yet another paper that shows that the commonly held knowledge that red will enhance the appetite, that commonly held knowledge is wrong. It's actually not just, it's not like it's kind of right, it is pretty predictably wrong. Didn't these guys get the memo? Red label, Coca-Cola, a lot of soft drinks are red. And I found this picture of this sampler of junk foods, and I was surprised that almost all of it has some red on it. Fast food chains benefit through mimicry. They don't use red because it is stimulating the appetite, but they recognize that red means you're in line for some scrumptious fast food, not fat food. That was actually a typo that I left in. So the three related hypotheses for red, is red associated with specific emotions? Yes, I think we can say that pretty clearly. Does it evoke a specific physiological response? Well, there's a small effect or perhaps no effect. Does it cause a specific emotional response? Sometimes, although we're not real sure. And the same thing, can it stimulate a specific action? Can it cause us to do something? Sometimes, but. In the big picture, if any color elicits an emotional response, it should be red. That was my initial starting point and the reason for choosing red. But the evidence for the psychological effects of red is nowhere near the claims that you see on the internet. Go figure. Stuff on the internet isn't true. Huh. This is a slide that I put in basically every single lecture where I talked about color psychology. On the one hand, you have the pop psychology that you read on the internet, an ocean full of information available. But on the other hand, if you dig through it carefully, you look for the backing up, the evidence that backs these claims up, virtually non-existent. The real psychology on color is very small. There's not billions of papers, and it's certainly not enough to support all of the claims that are made on the internet. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, John. That was terrific.
Thank you.
We can please put our cameras on and let's take some questions. You're free to put questions in the chat. You're free to put your hand up. You're free to unmute and talk.
I have a question.
Yeah, Jean, go ahead.
Hey, John, how are you?
Jean, good. I love the
Good.
background. It is so appropriate for today.
It's red, you know. So John, do you have any information or data on, a lot of companies, a lot of packaging companies do visual recognition in um, store settings to
Hmm.
see what draws the eye to a package on the shelf? Do you have anything on that?
I know that there's a university not far from me, Clemson, that has that equipment, the eye tracking goggles and the fake storefront, and they print up packages. I'm really not familiar with their research, so I wouldn't be able to comment on that.
Well, it's and certainly many of the brand owners do that as well. They
Yes.
have their own little stores. It'd be interesting to find out if visual recognition on the shelf just evokes a purchase response.
Hmm. Yeah. One related experiment that one of my students had done was to create cereal boxes that were devoid of graphics. So if you imagine a Cheerios box that's largely yellow and a few other colors, make a box with the same amount of yellow on it, one big yellow thing, and then a red stripe and a little bit of the other colors. She made boxes that were 8 different cereals, and he had people identify the boxes based just on the color. So there's no graphical information at all being portrayed, just the colors. And she was disappointed that she only found 50% recognition. And when I saw those results, I said, whoa, I mean, I don't think I would be able to pick out a lot of the cereals just based on the name or the box. So to be able to recognize just on the color, half of the time, I think that shows that that color does have a strong effect when it comes to being able to find uh, like a cereal box in in the cacophony of a cereal aisle.
Well, and back to your thoughts about the logos, you know, are you drawn to those logos? Same thing. Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, thanks.
sure.
Thank you. There's a question in the chat. It's a bit long, but it relates to blood, the color of blood, and the sorts of associations that might develop because of that. Can you comment on the role of the color of blood in various associations?
It has been suggested with the Berlin and K data where red came out as the first color to be differentiated. Uh, it has been suggested that maybe blood is the reason for that, that it is an important color. When we see blood, it means, we kind of should be doing something, paying attention. Uh, so that's a possibility. It's hard for us to learn I mean, if we could go back in a time machine 100,000 years ago and watch what's happening, maybe you could decide that, but it's a very difficult question to answer.
Hey, John.
Yes.
Hey, this is Leandro. I was the one who wrote the question. But just I figure perhaps I can give a little bit of context to it.
Okay.
If to me the thing that is interesting is that, oh yeah, let me turn on my camera. Hey everybody. Yeah, so to me that is interesting is that it all goes back to history, and if you go back to history on many different regions and many different beliefs, religious beliefs and whatnot, then a lot of it stems from life, right? And this association we have with life in its whole binary form, whether you're alive, whether you're dead, and and basically the significance of life relates to blood, and even the color of blood changes from their iron oxide being, or their iron in the blood being very red to a very dark complex, right? As it oxidizes, and then pretty much life dies. So I think there is a lot of relation to that. If you look at, psychology books, anything that has to do with, vitality, sex and whatnot, it relates to that color red on the dress because it relates to vitality, it relates to, you know, blood circulation, anything that has to do with mating as well, and psychology. And these are many psychologists talking about it in terms of what makes a person attractive. And, you know, people exercising has a lot of blood circulation and all that stuff. So there is a lot of, you know, related to blood. And that's the reason why I put that comment in there, because I feel like perhaps there is something in the literature that relates to blood from the psychological perspective, but there is a very, how to say, direct evidence that is a physiological that I feel that is not tapped enough, perhaps from a psychological response. So I figured to put that, because obviously you took the time to do all this literature search, which to me was wonderful. I'm very thankful for that. Perhaps it's something that, you know, could lead to a different type of search in the future, because I put there as a comment, more of a joke. If blood were blue, perhaps the lecture would have been in blue color, or perhaps if blood would have been green, you know, then the lecture would have been in green color. So anyways, that's
If
it.
this were done by a horseshoe crab, we'd be talking about blue. Horseshoe crabs have blue blood. Yeah, that's an interesting hypothesis, and it makes sense. But I'm not aware of any deep studies that have gone into that. I'll keep my mind and my ears open for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leonardo.
Could I ask one quick question?
Yes,
Sure, go ahead.
Our world surrounds us with greens and blues and maybe browns and things. So that's what we sort of think of as normal. And blood and red there's a few things that sort of jump out. Like when an apple gets ripe, it turns red. So we then know it's ripe, right? And that's how apples get their seed spread, right? And all of the other things that use that strategy. So maybe it's the fact that it's sort of an extra in our life rather than a general sort of part of everyday life has some effect on the way we react to it.
Yeah, I think that could be.
Anyway.
I'm not sure the apples turning red, spreading the seeds. I'm not sure that I agree with that, because apples in nature wouldn't be spread by humans, but by other mammals that wouldn't be able to distinguish between a red and a green apple. Oh, you're muted, Judith.
I turned myself off again. I turned myself off, sorry. But one of the strategies of fruits is that they do turn red, and then they attract people, creatures or whoever eats them, to take the seeds somewhere else. So it's sort of designed to be attractive to people who could. Of course, lots of animals can't see red, but still, we can. And I think insects and butterflies and things see way more colors than we do, don't they, too? So anyway, it's an interesting subject.
There's one, I don't know, conjecture that because there's only certain primates that have tricolor vision, and kind of when it evolved, it was fairly late in evolutionary terms, and it evolved from primates that were in Africa, and there was a fruit that was developing at that same time. So you could see when the fruit was ripened, and there was more information that you could get by the third cone. So that's kind of one line of thought. And another line of thought is with the trichromatic vision, we gain quite a lot in terms of value contrast. So we're also able to, you know, see predators more easily and so on. So there is at least some thought towards the evolutionary strategies of having the third cone, which opens up the warm colors. Like we have a warm color bias with the, you know, we have mostly the L and the M cones. Couple questions in the chat. Victoria asks, given that males are far more often so-called red-green colorblind than females, does the effect of red on the male population muted. Do you know if they checked for so-called color blindness in their studies?
Well, there's a lot of studies here. The dating example, clearly they didn't check for color blindness. But I think it's standard practice in most experiments that you would check for color blindness first, but you may not. And obviously, having 8% of the males not be able to see red would have a big effect on whether or not they notice the food on the plate or the color of the plate. So I can't say categorically, but I think most of them did do that test.
Thanks. Question from Sarah in the chat. Sarah, do you want to unmute and ask?
Yeah, it's maybe not even a question so much as just something I've wondered about. So with Berlin and Kay's third term being red, it's always seemed interesting to me that red is sort of right in the middle of the value scale between white and black, and whether it has something to do with that midpoint of value. So it's maybe less its color so much as its placement in terms of value.
But gray isn't, you would think if that were the case that gray would be categorized along with red. And
yes, but if the study, because the study was so many different cultures and the terms did, I mean, there's lots of problems with it. It was Eurocentric and all the rest of it. And I don't believe the terms precisely matched up, the names precisely matched up with the many different language groups. And so gray may not have been a word, red may not have been a word. But there would have been a category that Berlin and Kay would have decided fit whatever that vocabulary was. I seem to remember reading once that one of the language groups studied, instead of using white and black, they used moist and dry. So a binary. Anyway, so it could be that what you're saying is why, if it's the midpoint in terms of the value scale, why not gray? I think what I would wonder is perhaps, and I seem to remember also with that study that it eventually gets to 11 different language terms. Pink is one of them and gray is another. Anyway, yeah, just a query.
yeah, it's a thought. And then the 12th one comes along in certain languages like Russian, Polish, Japanese, where they differentiate between light blue, what we would call cyan or cerulean, and navy blue, that we call dark blue. They have single words that are considered basic color terms. I think it's interesting that it's still evolving and that us English-speaking folks are not in the lead.
Yeah, they redid their study too in the 90s, and it tweaked it a little bit. And there's a separation of warm, cool colors before they actually, and they start to take into effect the fact that they're not necessarily naming colors, but they're naming objects. And so that sort of ties in. I think it's interesting, your comment, though. I don't know if anyone else knows, or I see David Briggs is here. He might know a little bit about that.
Could pigment availability have influenced the choice of the third term as red, since iron oxide is found almost everywhere on Earth?
That's reasonable. I think if you look at like the Lascaux caves in France, the pigments that they were using included iron oxide red and umber. So that's plausible. David, do you have a comment on this?
I was actually just looking for a reference when Robin and my ears picked up and heard my name mentioned, and so quite. But I remember that John colors flags often have red as a color, and John Gage has a comment in Color in Art that that you know that the official meaning of red in all these different countries is wildly different. He lists about 25 different meanings of red, official meanings of red in different in the flags of different countries, and often wildly different meanings.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, do you want another comment? Or John, go ahead.
When you say meanings of the colors in the flags, like you're thinking that in the US, we look at the red in the flag and it symbolizes blood. That's the sort of association you're referring to?
Yeah, let me just, so the ones he lists are the official interpretations of the color red: war, blood, bravery, authority, fire, unity, revolution, soil, sacrifice, faith, sun, freedom, revolt, swordsmanship and horsemanship, independence, law and order, law and authority, brotherhood and equality, nation, charity, vitality, friendliness, warmth.
Well, ours are leaves, right? Our red leaves, which is a Canadian symbol, is our red leaf, because we have maple leaves that turn this beautiful red in the fall. So that's why we have ours, I think.
So that's the symbolism of red, which I guess is maybe not exactly the same, exactly what you're talking about today, John, but I just popped in.
There does seem to be a very strong non-consensus about what red means.
Yep. Good.
Sarah, did you want to say anything more?
Yeah, well, I wanted to say how much I really enjoyed that talk, because you do hear so often, oh, this color means this and that color means that, and you're very kind of careful parsing through of, research on response, sort of scientifically gathered response of people to given colors is super interesting. And it strikes me that, as Albert says, you just don't see color in isolation. So a color is always bound by all kinds of layers of cultural history and personal autobiography. And so there's, the idea of being able to respond to a color, what would that even mean? There is no such thing as well, any human experience that is in isolation, and maybe especially color is, it just doesn't exist in isolation. So yeah. Anyway, I really appreciated the talk. It was just terrific.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun putting this together.
I think I do want to make a comment in that. One of the things that I really appreciate about your talk, John, and I've been following you for a while, so I know you're very scientific, is that it's not that color psychology doesn't exist, but it's just that that picture you put between the spoon with water and the ocean is very realistic as to how much the commercial side of things have pretty much exploded the significance of something that was supposed to be very specific from the get-go, right? Just for sakes of manipulation of human minds towards a commercial end. So I think this is something that definitely needs to or deserves attention of more people, and I will encourage you to disseminate it through many different platforms. If you can, use YouTube, because I think a lot of people watch it. But well done. Kudos to you, man. Thank you for doing this. Very much needed.
Thank you. In some sense, I'm disappointed, because I would like to be able to hand to my students a simple guidebook that they can say, okay, if you're doing a logo for a company that is in the banking industry, then, or, I would like to have a nice small set of rules that are universally applicable. But I'm disappointed that the real world is not that simple.
I will take more encouragement than disappointment, John. I think like it depends on where as well, right? You know, you see in Spain, for example, banks use a lot, you know, the red and the orange tones, whereas here in America, blue is the preferred color, unless it's tied up to patriotism, where, you know, shades of, you know, white and red come into play with blue. So I think a lot of it has to do with what is the real, you know, meaning you want to attach to the brand. And I think, you know, people like, because my brother-in-law is in marketing and he does a lot of branding. He's a branding expert.
Mhm.
And when we were talking about Pantone and then my experience as a color science, it just makes for good conversations about, you know, breaking the rules, especially, right? And, you know, who knows? I think at the end of the day, it's a more complex subject, but it's because it's complex, it's rich. And I'd rather see it from the viewpoint of abundance of opportunities as opposed to to scarcity, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, John. One more
Okay.
round of applause for you. Very interesting, very fascinating. People are just so compelled. I find often first thing when I teach my courses, the students, that's their strongest feeling about these associations with color. So I think having that wider perspective and teasing it out a little bit is as Leandro was saying, very important to get across to as many people as we can. So thank you once again. Thank you everyone for joining us. And please join us International Color Day, which is coming up March 21st. We are having, if you are a CRSC member, our annual general meeting. And then at 7 p.m. we have a lecture that's open to everyone. Udo was here earlier, but I think he's gone. He'll be talking about color in the built environment. So thank you once again and see you next time. Thanks, John.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. That was great.